I sat down with John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, to discuss everything from Brexit to anti-Semitism, his plans for renationalisation. But I began by asking him if he'd ever taken drugs.
I'm a working class kid. I could never afford Class A drugs. I wouldn't want to.
Excellent. But we'll leave that there. I think probably everybody in this room wants to know what sort of Chancellor would you be? Is there someone, previous Chancellor you've got in mind, or are you going to be a completely different Chancellor if you get into the Treasury?
There's no one I've got in mind, but let's put it this way. I keep explaining to people that when we go into government, when you did the survey on the biggest threat to the economy, I thought I was going to come out top, as I do in some polls. And I've been trying to say to people, time and time again, the nature of my chancellorship will be one in which we determine the policies in advance, that we're open and transparent in the discussions about those policies, that we establish structures that will enable us to implement them together, and that as a result of that, we'll overcome these issues of confidence, that there clearly are. Let's be honest, there is a confidence issue with regard to a future Labour government.
Why do you think that is after
because we're radical.
So many years?
Well, we're radical. We want to change the way our economy works, actually in line with some of the discussions that you've had in previous years as well. It's about investment. It's about what Mariana Mazzucato will be talking about later, was real value. It's about tackling climate change. But it is about addressing let's be honest, the grotesque inequalities that there are in our society. Now, that is quite a radical agenda. We put forward lots of policy ideas. But the issue for us is how do we secure people's confidence? Well, the only way we can secure it is by being completely open, transparent. And I do this thing about there's no tricks up my sleeve. What you see is what you'll get when we go into government. Some of this you will like, some of it you will dislike, but that's the nature of politics. But also what I'm trying to do is consult with people and talk to people about the nature of the structures that we have. So when we go into government, I use this phrase, we all go into government, because actually I don't think government should be just left to politicians.
What is it that you think people in this room won't like about what it is you're going to do?
Well, some of them are concerned about some of the taxation policies and our public ownership policies. Straightforwardly, I've said, look, we've got to tackle the inequalities in our society. It does need a fair taxation system. And so we've laid out those proposals. And it will mean, I'm being straight with people, it will mean the top 5% paying more income tax. It will mean rolling back some of the corporation tax cuts. But that money will go into funding our public services. I haven't met anyone. I've been meeting asset managers. Some of you will know I think it was the Times who first said it was my tea offensive, where I don't accept free meals, so I offer people a cup of tea. Austerity is over. We give them biscuits now and allow that to happen. But I've been touring around saying to people, look, this is what we're doing. I've not met an asset manager, a banker, a chief executive who wants to come out of their office and step over a homeless person, or who doesn't feel there shouldn't be more security with more police on our streets. So I'm saying these are our taxation policies. It will go into our public services, and it will go into long-term, stable investment for the future.
When you go around, and you mentioned your tea offensive, which are the companies with the structures or the way that they do business that you like?
I never say that, because as soon as I mention someone, it's almost laying them out for a real savage attack by a certain number of newspapers.
What sort of?
Hardly the time.
What sort of companies then?
Well, all right. I will.
What for you is a good company? What's a bad company?
Companies that have long-term plans for their company and long-term plans for their engagement in the economy overall, that have, yes, recognised their social responsibilities, and also at the same time engage with both their consumers, their passengers, whatever, and the workers themselves who create the wealth. And there'll be the shining examples of what that's happened, and I won't go into them because I'll embarrass people. And as I say, often when I mention a name, it sets them up for a scrutiny that they've not invited because they're not politicians. But there's a whole range of examples of that going on, and what I'm trying to do is build upon the best.
You've been consulting on plans for both renationalisation and employee ownership and workers on boards. Are those plans changing, and in what way are they changing as a result of those consultations?
Yeah, we've basically, what I've said to people is, here's some of the objectives that we want to achieve. Here's our outline of the programme we put in our last manifesto. We're now preparing the next manifesto. We're doing a preparation for government exercise as well. Saying to people, if you agree with the objectives and you've got different routes that you think we should pursue, or if you've got ways in which you want to advise us on the implementation of those policies, come and see us and we'll listen.
One of the things I wanted to ask you was the new Governor of the Bank of England is, well, they're advertising, the process is live. If you've got someone, if it was up to you, who would you have?
No, I wouldn't identify a name at this stage. I have a good working relationship with Mark Carney. Let's be clear, our policy is to maintain the independence of the Bank of England. But when I go around and speak to chief executives and others and economists and others, and in the city in particular, we want to look to see whether or not we review the mandate of the Bank of England, maybe move it nearer towards the Fed, but that's one of the discussions. We had a report done for us by Graham Turner in the city, which was looking at whether or not the mandate should include some element of commitment to productivity targets. I'm not sure if that's the mandate for the Bank of England that we want, but we've opened up that discussion, and I think it's been a fascinating discussion. Alongside that, though, and this is the issue that was mentioned earlier, and it's been an issue that's come up with these events in the past, how do we secure the scale of investment that we need? At the moment, we're putting forward a £500 billion programme over 10 years. I don't think that's sufficient. That's state-funded. I don't think that's sufficient to meet the challenges we need. Therefore, how do we attract the investment from the private sector and from the finance sector that we need? And that's why I'm sitting down talking to pension funds, looking at models that have worked elsewhere to enable that to happen. That means maybe establishing new structures for that. One of the ideas that came up from Graham Turner's report was having a strategic investment board where you bring the Bank of England, the Treasury Bays, with the private sector and with others together to look at how we can develop a longer-term infrastructure, for example, investment programme. I meet with John Armett for the Infrastructure Commission. We have a regular session. He outlines what our needs and as far as I can see at the moment, I don't think we've got the resources to match those needs, and we need a serious discussion about that.
So how much more money is that? You've talked about 500 billion, but how much more do you think you need?
We're looking at that at the moment. As soon as I mention a figure, what will happen? The Tories will triple it. But the key issue is, as I go round, it's the point that was made earlier. Our priorities are what? One, the reality is there's an existential threat, which is climate change. So how do we tackle climate change in a way that gives us economic advantages for the long-term future? That's the first thing. The second thing, the fourth industrial revolution, automation, AI. And just as much as I'm talking to employers, I'm talking to trade unions and experts and academics and universities. That's where our R&D money needs to go itself. But also, the reality too is that we've got to tackle inequality, particularly the regional inequality, which is grotesque within our country and motivates political decisions like Brexit, which actually, if we don't tackle that inequality, we'll be in a situation which I think we'll regret in the future.
You mentioned about how the Tories will respond. Obviously, we've got the Tory leadership contest happening at the moment. Lots of candidates saying they're going to end austerity, and then yesterday Boris Johnson making a big announcement on income tax. What have you made of the sort of various economic pitches of the leadership candidates?
I'm enjoying the Tory leadership election. It's quite,
at least someone is.
It's quite nice to spectate on a leadership election. I'm quite used to them in the Labour Party at the moment on a regular basis. Well, it didn't take much from me to take apart Boris's proposals. Most of the other Tory leadership candidates actually did that as well. And I just say this, and it echoes what some of the other Tory leadership candidates have said. Out there are 4.5 million children living in poverty. We've just had a UN report, special rapporteur, that doesn't talk about poverty anymore, it talks about destitution. And when you then start talking about giving tax giveaways to some of the highest earners, you can see how people will react against that. Now, I've supported the threshold changes in the budget that Philip Hammond brought forward, because I thought those earners in that middle range, 50 to 80,000, needed a bit more of a boost. But on this scale, it was £10 billion being spent. When, as I say, I'll just give you one statistic. A report 3 months ago, because of our collapse of social care, 87 people die a day before they receive the social care they need. And this is the 5th largest economy in the world. No wonder people are quite angry out there. So I just think we need to have a proper discussion about what our priorities are. And I just think Boris got it completely wrong. I think it demonstrated just how out of touch she was. And it didn't need me to say it. Actually, virtually every other Tory candidate said it as well. He's the front runner at the moment. Yeah.
Who's the Tory candidate who is most likely to stop Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister?
None of them.
You don't fear any of them?
No.
Because people talk about how Boris Johnson is, you know, the sort of British Trump who could take on a populist like Jeremy Corbyn, but you don't think...
Bring it on.
You've got to get, I mentioned you've got to get off to go to the shadow cabinet. You were at the PLP meeting last night of Labour MPs. Was it as lively as the reports suggest this morning?
Sweetness and light, just as ever.
So there were one or two things that were brought up by Labour MPs last night. One in particular being the EU and the party's ongoing turmoil, it seems, over its position on the second referendum.
It's not turmoil. We've had to come to terms.
It is, to be fair, it is turmoil.
Okay,
you've got loyal Labour MPs standing up the PLP challenging the leader to his face that he's going to lose support if he doesn't shift position.
I know you might not appreciate this, but that's the sort of democracy I want. I'm a great admirer of what I thought was quite a heroic political figure that's never been properly acknowledged, and that's Harold Wilson, because he had a cabinet where he allowed debate and there was rumbustious argument, but as a result of that I think came out with better decisions. And I'd rather have people get up and say this is what I feel passionately than them just to sneak away in the corners and plot. And I whatever people think about those sort of meetings, I'd rather have that. And where we are on Brexit, we campaigned for Remain. Jeremy was criticised for not campaigning hard enough. That's rubbish. He threw his heart into it. We campaigned for Remain. We lost. We had to respect the referendum. We then come out of that. We go into the 2017 general election. We said we'd respect that referendum manifesto. We then went to our party conference and we said, look, we'll step by step, we'll do everything we can to stop a no deal Brexit, because it's so damaging to our economy. We'll try and secure a deal. I was in 6 weeks of negotiations with the Tories, and I thought we could get a deal. They were falling out in front of us. And then I got to the stage in the 5th week, I realised that even if we could march our people to the top of the hill, they would not be there, and we would disillusion everybody. So those talks ended. So we got to a situation now where we don't think we can get anything through Parliament. We've tried our deal. There isn't majority support for it. So the situation now is it's most probably going to have to go back to a public vote. We want a general election. If we can't get that, most probably a public vote in another referendum. And that's not where we want to be, but that's where the nature of the politics in Parliament at the moment has forced us to.
Can you understand why people find it confusing that on the one hand your policy is to deliver Brexit and on the other hand it's to have a second referendum to campaign for Remain?
But that's the nature of the compromise that
you either want to deliver Brexit or you don't.
No. Let's be clear. If you've argued a case and you've lost democratically, you've got to try and respect that democratic decision. But also you've got to be honest with people and say, I can't deliver it. So therefore, what do? If we can't deliver it in Parliament, you have to go back to the people at some stage. I'd like a general election because I want to get rid of this Tory government as well. But if we can't get that, the reality is that we have to go back to the people in some form of public. And we should be honest about that. The big thing for me, though, is I maintain dialogue cross-party with Conservatives as well, because the big thing for me is to stop a no-deal Brexit, because I think it'll be so damaging to our economy. And I don't want to be in a situation where my
MPs and supporters want to stop Brexit full stop. That's the problem, isn't it? And you've seen your policy has helped revive the Lib Dems who were...
Well, it might. Well, look, it is the toughest road. We've tried to get, I described it as a traditional British compromise. And it is trust. It's easy to go to both extremes. Easy. The hardest bit is to try and bring people together. Tragically, we've failed to do that because we couldn't get agreement on what we think was a reasonable compromise around a Brexit that would work. Now, in Parliament, all we can do now is make sure we stop a no-deal Brexit and then, if necessary, go back to the country.
I'll take a couple of questions. One last question on that. Are you embarrassed that the Labour Party seemed to move more quickly to remove Alistair Campbell for voting Lib Dem than it seems to for people accused of anti-Semitism?
I was annoyed, but here's the irony. The process that removed Alistair Campbell was brought in by New Labour under Alistair Campbell and Tony Blair. So what I've said is you should review that procedure. It doesn't work. It needs a completely different process, completely. And on the anti-Semitism side, I've always argued we need a swifter, more ruthless process for dealing with any form.
You've been saying that for ages, and it doesn't
but it is beginning to improve. I've seen the numbers that are going through, and it has begin to improve. Jenny Formey, our new General Secretary, has brought in a QC, she's brought in a legal team so we don't lose any cases either, which we haven't, and it's just driving that through now. But yeah, you just always have to be on top of it, and as I say, swifter and more ruthless.
How do you feel about the fact the Labour Party is being investigated by the Equality and Human Rights Commission?
I welcome it now. Let's get this sorted.
It's shameful, isn't it, for the Labour Party?
Look at all political parties at the moment. Look at what's happening in Islamophobia.
No, I'm talking about your political party.
No, but look at what's happening in Islamophobia. We've got to recognise there is racism in our society. And I tell you what we haven't recognised up until now, the levels of anti-Semitism. That there isn't just, you can accuse the Labour Party, but there is in our society overall, and it's been there for centuries, and we thought we'd overcome it, and we haven't.
Why has it come back in the Labour Party?
Well, I think it's because it's a reflection of what's happening in wider society. We've had 0.01% of cases in our party. That is, I think, a tragedy, but look at what's happening in wider society. We're having Jewish cemeteries daubed with Nazi swastikas. We're having Jewish children have to be protected when they go to school. That is unacceptable. So we will root it out within our party, and that will enable us to contribute to rooting it out within our society. I do not want to live in a society where that occurs. Full stop.
OK, I'm being told we've massively run out of time. John needs to go back to sort out Labour's Brexit policy at the Shadow Cabinet. John McDonnell, thank you very much.
Cheers.